Francis and Sarah Van Etten Kennedy. Francis was born in 1827 in Donegal County, Ireland, one of 5 children, and he left home at 14, and he and a brother, according to tradition, went to Liverpool, and they emigrated to the United States from there. And this was a big deal. It took 2 weeks, and usually the ships were not very convenient. Living conditions were bad and so forth. And in fact, one time we visited there, and they talked about coffin ships. And many of the people who attempted to make the journey did not make it, so they died en route. So that was another thing. But anyhow, he was born in 27. He was 21 when he immigrated. And so he came first to the South, and he and a brother were tinkers. And that means he went to farm selling tinware. Then he worked at a plantation in Kentucky, I believe, and eventually ended up in Bath, Illinois. Neil and I have been there. All right. The grandmother, Sarah Van Etten, tradition has it that she was half Iroquois, and that she came by covered wagon from New York to Bath, Illinois. Bath, New York to Bath, Illinois. And so they lived, and then there, at first, they were married. There, Neil and I have certification of this, and they had 2 children were born there. Then they moved to the Mankato, and was not Mankato, it was St. Clair, which was an Irish settlement near St. Clair, near Mankato. All right, and near Mankato. Came to Kirkovan, and 2 of the other Kennedy girls, the other family that lived near where they had purchased this land, which was 640 acres versus 200. So anyhow, that's kind of the origin of where we came from. So my dad, he said that his job was to read the St. Paul newspaper to the grandfather every day, plus be his personal attendant. Here we are at the Swift County Benson Courthouse. We can thank our ancestor, Joseph Cannon, J.F. Cannon, on the cornerstone here, which is 1898. Imagine, considering a whole century plus another 20 years. All right, he came from New York State. His parents were Irish immigrants, but he was born in New York. All right, and so then he came west. That was the era of go west, young man, and so that's what he did. He came to Savage, Minnesota, which was the stopping off place for Irish immigrants at James J. Hill and Archbishop Ireland. There he met my grandmother, and her maiden name was Bridget Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S, and they were from County Cork. All right, so they met there, and then apparently they and others came to Swift County in the 1870s. And Mother was told about, they came and they lived on a tree climb. And this was part of the Homestead Act of 1862. And so this was a momentous change in their lifestyle. And after the son that was looking after the farm got married, they moved to the town of DeGraff. I'm going to tell you a love story, which sounds like it's made up, but it's actually true. When they did move from the St. Clair, Mankato area to Kirkovan in 1900, Charlie was 20. So this may be happening, it would be after that sometime. All right? So And of course, every farmer would have 8 to 10 horses because they had used them with their horse-drawn machinery for the farm work. So, hey, one morning they woke up, no horses. So Charlie organized a posse, for want of a better name, to scour the countryside, north, south, east, and west. But then you bear in mind, there were all gravel roads at that time and so forth. So after a great deal of looking, they came to the Joseph Cannon farm, which was 6.5 to 7 miles from north of Kirkhoven where they lived. The Cannons had several girls, so you can imagine the excitement that there was to have a group of men arrive on the scene to, get their horses back to their original farm. But then also I'll tell you a little bit about Rose. Rose was rather a striking figure. She was like Peggy in stature, and she had such a good posture that she really was a very attractive woman. So they dated, and then in 1911 they had a storybook wedding at the DeGraff Church. So that is romance of the old days. 1932 was a momentous year for Charlie and Rose Kennedy and the boys, and of course we were all still home. That was the year that Chet graduated from high school, and then 1932 was the year that I started school, but it was also a momentous year economically, because this had followed the 1929 stock crash. So he had to do something. So he came up with the idea of buying and selling old horses, because that's when tractors were coming in, which was really a very momentous time, because all field work was done with horses. He would go to, I remember they would get up early in the morning, because I could smell the coffee. I was still sleeping naturally. And so, but he would, 6 o'clock or more, he'd be gone. And he'd sometimes home for supper, sometimes not. We had this 5-acre tract of land that had a barn, and there was a chicken house on it, and that was right adjacent to the school. There was our house facing the church, then the creamery, then this 5 acres. And after his death, we sold that to the school, so it's now part of the school land. All right, but anyhow, they would have, well, sometimes my dad had over 20 horses because this 5 acres was all fenced. But when they had 7 or more, they would get up early in the morning, and then they would pack them into the, it was not a tandem truck, it was a straight truck. I don't know how better to describe it. But they put them in sardine-like, they had in the rump of the other and so forth. So that Chet then would take them, and we originally sold to both Mink and Fox Farms, but the majority of the sales were to Esterville, Iowa. There was Hill Packing Company, and that was right over the border into Iowa. So I would ride, occasionally I would go both with my dad, and that was really interesting, because somehow he had just an uncanny sense of direction. Plus they had country stores, and for lunch then we would stop at a country store and have some type of, I don't know what we would have, but then we'd have a bottle of pop, because that was Eugene thought that was great. But anyhow, this continued, and Chet remained at our home. Chet didn't get married till he was 31, and my dad and he continued to function until Chet went to service, and then he hired a local man, Max McGinty, who filled in for him. And this then, when Chet came home, they continued this until 1949. And then my dad died as a result of outbuying horses On a November night at dusk, he drove into a unmarked trailer. He was hospitalized and he lived 11 days in the Benson Hospital. And so then they discontinued that. But you have to admire his ingenuity because I think he was really quite desperate. When he died, he was debt-free and a small amount of cash, so success comes from those that work for it. Charlie had the first car in Murdoch, a Model T Ford, in 1924. We are at the Swift County Benson Hospital, which had a great deal of significance to my wife, Elvina Weber, who worked here starting in 1948. That was the year she graduated from high school. And Elvina was the office manager, drill of all trades. My dad was a patient in this hospital in 1949, and he, as a result of an auto accident, in fact, he passed away here. And I remember distinctly Elvina being here then at that time, as we had met a year earlier, but that was, another milestone of our life. This is St. Francis Church in Benson, Minnesota, and this is the wedding site for Elvina and I. We had a formal wedding attire. We had white jackets and dark pants, and Merlin and Joe Cannon were two of my attendants, and my brother Harold was an usher along with Elvina's brother Don. These two men I speak of, Elvina and I had introduced them to their spouses, so we were in their weddings and they were in our wedding. Another highlight of this was that Elvina had purchased her wedding dress, had driven to Minneapolis, which is like 125 miles from here, purchased it at Dayton's, which was an exclusive department store, and I think this gown was $98. In fact, we still have the receipt of it. Following the wedding, and Mr. and Mrs. Weber picked up the tab. We had our meal. That was the noontime meal at the Benson Golf Club, which was the thing, and that was most enjoyable, and we opened our gifts there. But the interesting, and even more, is the wedding dance, and that was held at Murdoch. The village hall at Murdoch was something out of a storybook. There was a band, I think it was Colstead's, a 5-piece band, and it was beastly warm that day and into the night. And Merlin Rosemeyer, my attendant, he didn't take his jacket off because he had yellow suspenders holding up his pants. But anyhow, all in all, during the night, a thunderstorm arose, lightning struck the hall and burned to the ground. So, as a result of that, there's now a different town hall in Murdoch. All in all, it was an adventuresome day. The graph itself is special to me in that the Irish lore is this is where my parents were married in 1911. It's very unique in that the stained glass windows are magnificent, is the only way you could state that. And I believe they perhaps came from France because they must have been the Mecca of stained glass, because the Murdoch Church windows are likewise from France. But anyhow, and then in addition, I think it was in the 30s or 40s that some artist portrayed the Stations of the Cross in almost like life-size figures on the walls of this church. My dad had the first auto in Murdoch. That was 1924, a Model T4. So bear in mind that this church was built in horse and buggy days. The cemetery here was where the original people from this whole area, so the Murdoch people were buried here. So my grandparents on the Cannon side are all buried here, as well as some from the grandparents, Kennedy. So this was always a great deal of pride in this church. It's still in excellent condition, and I could just see somebody making an art museum out of this. And we are at the Church of the Sacred Heart in Murdoch, my parental church, and I have a nephew, Peter Kennedy, with me as well. So the Sacred Heart Catholic Church was an integral part of our community, in that my parents lived directly across from this, and we kind of lived by the bell. The Angelus rang at 7 a.m., 12 noon, and 6 p.m. And as a child, I remember if I was playing on the village green, I knew I'd better get home because meals were served precisely at that time. What I recall from my parents and so forth is the church was built in 1925, and prior to that there was a mission church, in that De Graaf was the parental church, and I believe that was built in 1901 or 2, something like that. That is why some of the grandparents are actually buried in the De Graaf cemetery. But the church itself is a beautiful structure. The stained glass windows, and there's one in honor of my great-grandparents, Francis and Sarah Kennedy, which it truly is a grandparent to me. My father's name was Charlie, and he lived here. An interesting thing, my parents were buried from here, and both Chet and Harold married the local girls, so they were married here. All in all, it was a good run.